There is a point in life where silence becomes louder than effort, where everything that was planned, prayed for, visualized, and worked toward seems to pause at a strange threshold. The dream is still clear in the mind. The desire is still strong in the heart. The intention is still present every day, but the external reality does not seem to move at the same speed, and that creates a tension that is difficult to ignore. It is not the kind of struggle that comes from failure. It is the kind of struggle that comes from waiting without explanation. Because failure is at least clear. It shows what is missing, what needs to be corrected, what needs to be rebuilt, but delay without explanation feels different. It feels like something is incomplete, but without clarity on what that something actually is. So the mind begins to search for reasons. Maybe it is timing, maybe it is external conditions, maybe it is people, opportunities, environment, or circumstances that have not aligned yet. These explanations feel comforting at first because they place the delay outside of personal responsibility. They make the situation feel temporary and external rather than internal. But over time, a deeper realization begins to surface, because even when external conditions improve, the same sense of delay sometimes remains. Even when opportunities appear, something still feels blocked. Even when progress begins, it does not always sustain itself. And this is where confusion deepens, because the surface-level explanations no longer fully explain the experience. This is where a more uncomfortable truth begins to emerge. The delay is not always about what is missing outside. Often, it is about what is not yet aligned within. Not in a judgmental way, and not as a form of blame, but as a structural reality. Because every outcome in life requires more than desire. It requires alignment between intention, identity, consistency, and internal readiness. And when any of these areas are not fully aligned, movement becomes unstable. This means that dreams are not only delayed by external obstacles, they are also shaped by internal readiness. A vision can be clear, but if the internal structure is not yet capable of holding that vision consistently, life naturally slows the process, not to punish, but to prepare, not to reject, but to refine, not to deny, but to ensure sustainability. Because receiving something before becoming ready to sustain it often leads to loss, confusion, or collapse. So what feels like delay is sometimes protection in disguise, a space where internal strengthening is happening quietly, even when it is not immediately visible. And this is where perspective begins to shift. Instead of seeing delay as something against the dream, it begins to be understood as part of the formation of the dream. Instead of viewing it as stagnation, it becomes possible to see it as development that is not yet visible. Instead of assuming absence, it becomes possible to consider preparation. But even with this understanding, another question still remains. If everything is being prepared, why does it still feel so slow? And the answer often leads back to alignment, because preparation is not only external, it is deeply internal. It involves identity becoming stable enough to carry responsibility. It involves consistency becoming strong enough to sustain momentum. It involves belief becoming solid enough to support expansion without collapse. Without this internal strengthening, progress remains fragile. It may begin, but it does not fully stabilize. It may appear, but it does not fully last. It may show signs of movement, but it does not fully mature into manifestation, and that is why dreams sometimes feel close, yet not fully realized. Not because they are not possible, but because the internal foundation is still being shaped to support them. This is the hidden layer most people do not see when they look at their own journey. They see effort, but not alignment. They see desire, but not structure. They see movement, but not sustainability. And so the delay becomes misunderstood. But once this deeper layer is recognized, everything begins to shift in meaning. The waiting is no longer empty. The silence is no longer meaningless. The delay is no longer purely external. It becomes part of a process that is shaping something more stable than immediate success. And this is where awareness begins to change everything. Not by speeding up time, but by understanding what the time is building internally. One of the deepest and most overlooked reasons dreams remain unmanifested is not lack of vision, but misalignment between vision and identity. The dream may be clear, even vivid. The direction may feel undeniable. The desire may be strong enough to stay present for years, yet something still does not fully lock into place, and progress feels partially delayed or inconsistent. This is where the hidden gap exists. A vision can exist in the mind, long before the identity is capable of holding it in reality, and that gap creates tension, because vision pulls forward, but identity holds the current position. Vision expands imagination, but identity determines what feels natural, what feels sustainable, and what feels believable in daily life. When those two are not aligned, movement becomes unstable. It is not that the dream is wrong, it is that the internal structure has not yet fully adjusted to support it. This is why many people experience cycles of progress followed by resistance. There are moments when everything feels aligned, clarity is strong, motivation is high, and action feels natural. But then something shifts internally, doubt appears, habits weaken, focus scatters, and momentum slows again. This pattern is not random. It is the result of identity lagging behind vision. Because identity is built over time through repetition, belief, environment, and internal reinforcement. It is shaped by what has been experienced, what has been consistently thought, and what has been emotionally accepted as normal. So when a vision demands a higher version of life, identity does not immediately follow. It resists. Not because it rejects the dream, but because it has not yet adapted to it. And this resistance creates delay, because life does not only respond to what is desired, it responds to what is internally normalized. If the identity still operates from limitation, hesitation, or inconsistency, then expansion remains partial. Even when effort is present, the internal system is not fully synchronized with the vision being pursued. This is why some progress feels temporary. It appears but does not stabilize. It begins but does not fully develop. It moves forward but does not sustain long-term expansion. And over time, this creates frustration. Because externally, effort is being applied. Internally, however, identity is still being reshaped. And until identity catches up to vision, manifestation remains incomplete. This is also why transformation feels uncomfortable. Because identity does not change instantly. It is not rewritten in a single moment. It adjusts slowly through repeated exposure to new thoughts, new actions, and new levels of consistency. Each aligned action begins to challenge the old identity. Each disciplined choice begins to weaken the previous limitations. Each moment of consistency begins to build a new internal standard. But this process takes time, and during that time, misalignment is often felt as delay. Yet in reality, it is development. The vision is not being denied. It is being matched internally. Because what is not stable inside cannot remain stable outside. Life does not simply grant outcomes based on desire alone. It reflects the level of identity that has been consistently reinforced. So when identity is still shifting, results appear unstable. When identity is still forming, progress appears delayed. When identity is still expanding, manifestation appears partial. But as alignment begins to form, something changes. Actions become more natural. Decisions become clearer. Consistency becomes easier to maintain. And what once felt forced begins to feel like a natural expression of who is becoming. This is the point where vision and identity start to synchronize, and once synchronization begins, delay starts to reduce. Not because effort suddenly increases, but because internal resistance begins to dissolve, because alignment is no longer split. It becomes unified, and in that unity, manifestation begins to move forward with far less friction than before. Another powerful reason dreams remain delayed is not the absence of effort, but the presence of inconsistency. Many journeys are not stopped by complete inactivity. They are slowed by repeated interruption. There is movement, but it is not continuous. There is effort, but it is not stable. There is progress, but it does not sustain long enough to fully compound into results. And this creates a hidden problem that is often misunderstood, because from the outside, it may look like things are happening. Steps are being taken. Work is being done. Motivation appears at certain times. But internally, the pattern is unstable. The direction keeps shifting. The intensity keeps changing. The focus keeps rising and falling. And over time, this stops momentum from building. Momentum is one of the most powerful forces behind manifestation. When energy is consistent, progress compounds. Small actions begin to build on each other. Results begin to reinforce further action. Confidence begins to strengthen consistency. And eventually what once required effort begins to flow naturally. But inconsistency interrupts this entire process. Each time focus is lost, momentum resets. Each time discipline is broken, progress loses continuity. Each time motivation fades without structure, movement slows down again, and instead of building upward, the journey becomes a cycle of starting and stopping. This cycle creates frustration because effort is real, but results feel delayed. Intention is present, but outcomes feel incomplete. Desire remains strong, but manifestation feels distant. And the confusion grows deeper because it seems like something is being done, yet nothing is fully arriving. This is the nature of interrupted progress. It is not absence of action, it is absence of continuity. And continuity is what turns effort into results. Without continuity, energy is scattered. Without continuity, direction weakens. Without continuity, internal systems never fully stabilize into a pattern that produces lasting outcomes. Everything remains in a state of partial development. This is why many people feel like they are close for long periods of time, yet never fully arrive. They are repeatedly restarting the process instead of sustaining it, and each restart requires rebuilding momentum from the beginning. This drains energy. It creates emotional fatigue. It weakens belief over time because the pattern of stopping and starting begins to feel like lack of progress, even when effort is present. But the real issue is not effort, it is rhythm. Because manifestation is deeply connected to rhythm. When action becomes rhythmic, it creates stability. When stability continues long enough, it creates acceleration. And when acceleration continues, results begin to appear more naturally and consistently. But inconsistent energy breaks rhythm before it can fully form. This is why discipline matters more than intensity. Intensity can create short bursts of progress, but discipline creates sustained movement. Intensity can spark motivation, but discipline carries the process forward even when motivation fades. Intensity can start momentum, but discipline ensures it does not stop. And without discipline, inconsistency becomes the default pattern. This does not mean effort is not genuine. It means effort is not stabilized. And unstabilized effort cannot produce stabilized results. This is also where emotional cycles play a role. There are days when energy feels high, clarity feels strong, and everything seems possible. And there are days when energy drops, clarity weakens, and everything feels delayed or uncertain. Without structure, these emotional shifts begin to control action. And when emotion controls action, inconsistency becomes unavoidable. But when structure controls action, consistency becomes possible even when emotion fluctuates. This is where real transformation begins. Not in constant motivation, but in stable repetition. Not in emotional highs, but in disciplined continuity. Not in starting strong, but in continuing steadily. Because what begins repeatedly without continuation never becomes complete. But what continues consistently, even slowly, eventually becomes powerful enough to produce visible change. And this is why dreams often feel delayed, not because they are not working, but because they are not being sustained long enough to fully develop. Beyond identity and consistency, there is an even deeper layer that quietly influences whether dreams manifest or remain delayed. Internal resistance. This is the invisible force that operates beneath awareness, shaping behavior, emotion, and decision-making in subtle but powerful ways. It often does not announce itself. Instead, it shows up as hesitation, procrastination, sudden doubt, loss of motivation, emotional discomfort when things start to move forward, or even unexpected self-sabotage at the edge of breakthrough. On the surface, it looks like random inconsistency, but beneath the surface, it is often unresolved internal conflict. This resistance is not always logical. It is emotional, subconscious, and deeply rooted in past experiences, beliefs, and fears that have not been fully processed. Old disappointments can quietly shape expectations. Past failures can influence present confidence. Emotional wounds can create invisible boundaries around how much success feels safe, and without realizing it, these internal blocks begin to slow progress. Because every dream requires not only desire, but psychological permission to fully receive it. If a part of the mind associates success with pressure, responsibility, judgment, or fear of loss, then even strong desire can be met with resistance, not because the dream is rejected consciously, but because something deeper is not yet fully aligned with it. This is why progress can feel inconsistent even when effort is present. One part of the self is moving forward, while another part is holding back. One part is trying to expand, while another part is trying to protect. And this internal conflict creates friction. That friction is experienced as delay. It is not always obvious at first. It may feel like distraction, or tiredness, or confusion, or sudden lack of clarity about something that was previously very clear. But these shifts are often signals that internal resistance is active, and when resistance is active, energy becomes divided. Divided energy cannot produce strong manifestation because it is constantly pulling in two directions at once, forward and backward, expansion and protection, desire and fear. This is why some opportunities feel exciting at first but later feel heavy. Why motivation rises quickly but fades just as fast. Why certain goals feel aligned one moment and distant the next. It is not always external change. It is internal conflict surfacing. And until this conflict is acknowledged, it continues to influence outcomes silently. One of the most common forms of internal resistance is fear. Not always obvious fear, but subtle versions of it. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of losing stability, fear of change, fear of not being able to maintain success if it arrives. These fears do not always stop action completely. Instead, they slow it down, dilute it, or create hesitation at critical moments. They introduce doubt into decisions that should be clear. They create emotional weight around actions that should feel natural. And over time, this slows manifestation significantly, because life does not respond to surface-level desire alone. It responds to the deeper emotional alignment underneath it. If desire is strong but fear is also strong, movement becomes unstable. If intention is clear but resistance is still present, progress becomes partial. If vision is inspiring but internal conflict is unresolved, results remain inconsistent. This is why some people feel almost there for long periods of time. They are not blocked externally. They are divided internally. And the solution is not force. Forcing action against resistance often increases internal tension. The real shift comes from awareness, recognizing the presence of resistance, understanding where it comes from, allowing it to be acknowledged instead of ignored. Because what is seen clearly begins to lose its hidden control. As awareness increases, resistance begins to weaken. As internal clarity grows, emotional conflict begins to dissolve. As old beliefs are replaced with new alignment, internal division begins to close. And when that division closes, energy becomes unified again. This unity is powerful, because unified energy moves in one direction. It is no longer split between fear and desire. It is no longer divided between past experience and future vision. It becomes focused, steady, and aligned. And in that state, manifestation begins to flow with far less resistance. Not because challenges disappear, but because internal blocks no longer interfere with progress. This is the turning point where delay begins to lose its grip, not through external change, but through internal resolution. At this point, everything becomes clear in a deeper way. AMs are not delayed because they are impossible. They are not held back because something is missing from the outside. They are often paused in a space where internal alignment is still forming, where identity, consistency, and internal clarity are being shaped to match the vision that already exists within. And this realization changes the responsibility, because once awareness is present, the question is no longer, why is this happening? But what is now required from within? This is where transformation begins, not by waiting for external conditions to shift, but by taking ownership of internal alignment. Because the real movement and manifestation does not start outside, it starts inside. When internal structure changes, external reality begins to follow. So the call is not to wait, it is to align. Start by becoming aware of identity. Ask what beliefs are still operating beneath the surface. Notice where limitation still feels normal, where doubt still feels familiar, where fear still quietly influences decisions. Because what is unrecognized continues to control behavior silently. Awareness is the first step toward release. Then comes consistency. Not perfect consistency, but intentional repetition, small aligned actions repeated daily. Choices that reinforce the vision instead of contradicting it. Discipline that does not depend on motivation, but on commitment. Because consistency is what stabilizes identity over time. Without it, progress remains temporary. With it, progress begins to compound. And finally, internal resistance must be addressed, not ignored, not suppressed, but acknowledged. The fears that operate beneath awareness must be brought into clarity. Because what remains hidden continues to influence outcomes, but what is seen begins to lose its control. This is the process of real alignment. It is not instant. It is not always comfortable. but it is powerful. Because once identity, consistency, and internal clarity begin to align, delay loses its foundation, the distance between vision and reality begins to shrink, the sense of blockage begins to dissolve, and what once felt delayed begins to feel like it is finally moving into place. This is the shift most people are searching for, not a faster external world, but a more aligned internal state. Because when alignment becomes stable, manifestation becomes natural. So the action is simple, but not easy. Stop waiting for change to happen outside first. Begin building alignment inside, strengthen identity. Stabilize consistency. Release internal resistance and commit to becoming a version of yourself that no longer delays what is already meant to manifest. Because when alignment is real, delay no longer has a place to remain.